Well, Paul, here we are in Calgary.
Yep.
Same jackets, my man, and feeling very proud to do that. Yeah, we had a very interesting launch here in Calgary as part of the Conservative Convention, and we're out here also taking a look at what's happening on the front with separation, which has become a very boily topic in the last 12 hours.
Oh, yeah,
actually.
very sticky, yes.
And so, while we're out here, we thought it's time to meet some of the people that we admire in this town and get some opinion and discussion going on other topics. And this is a really good example of another topic that on a regular basis we talk about. And on a regular basis, we're being faced with it doing what we're doing with True Patriot Love. By the way, don't forget to subscribe, tell a friend, go ahead, hit the notification button. And you'll help us keep trucking along here. Today, we're going to speak with John Carpay, and we're going to do this on the terms of maybe the loss of our freedoms. And to quote him just a few moments ago, I don't want to sound alarmist. That proceeded to alarm me nonetheless. And John, thank you so much for joining us.
So glad to be with you guys.
So, as we sat here talking, just getting ready for the show, it occurred to us that, there's a bunch of bills being passed and have been passed that are potentially going to limit our freedom. And we've seen a trend over the last decade of this, I hate to say wokeness, but this kind of dialogue treatment that could become a matter of legality and a criminal affair for some people. Kind of position yourself and give us an idea of where we're at, if you don't mind.
So in terms of bills before Parliament right now, I'll mention 6 bills, and I'll try and do a 1 or 2 sentence description of each one, and then you can decide which ones to dive into more. 2.5 years ago, we had Bill C-11, which was the Online News Act, and the Online Streaming Act was C-11. And what that did is it took the powers of the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, had previously had jurisdiction authority over radio and television. Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, extended CRTC power over the internet. Now, we didn't see changes overnight, right? The bill passed, nothing changed, life is very much the same. But that Online Streaming Act, giving the CRTC authority over the internet, effectively that means that they can slowly say, well, you have to register your podcast. That's all, you just have to provide a brief annual report each year. Don't worry about it. It'll just take you 2 minutes, fill it out. How many podcasts did you do? And then it's like, well, you have to report on what are the topics that you addressed. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, we have to report, do you have enough Canadian content, Aboriginal content, LGBTQ content?
Right.
And, this is how it goes, right? It starts out slow and innocent. But this can happen. The power is there now for the CRTC, and they are already with the algorithms. The U.S. has commented on how this is a problem, that the algorithms are pushing what the CRTC wants as Canadian content to the forefront, and American stuff is less. And that's not a free internet. People should just...
Well, out of the gate, we get our news through Facebook and, all of these YouTube places that are now stopped up. So it's really done nothing for Canadians getting the information that they want. I don't know that it's provided anything to the pocketbook of Canadians in production of media or news, but it certainly has done that.
Well, that was followed up with the Online News Act, which was Bill C-18. That was also 2023. And the goal there, the idea was that Google and Facebook are, spreading news with the links, right? But they're not paying for it. That's unfair and that's unjust. So they passed C-18, the Online News Act. So Meta, including Facebook, said, no, we're not doing that at all. Yeah. So now you can't forward a news story via Facebook.
No, it's wild.
And then Google did kind of cooperate. They've got, I think it's $100 million a year. I'm not sure of the number, but there's a special slush fund created. But that only benefits government approved, the journalist outlets that government likes.
Right.
which are the ones getting government funding, which is, you know, the Global and the CTV and most of these so-called legacy media or establishment media.
Right. Yeah, and that has, you know, it's so interesting because I think that that's done us some good, Paul, because it puts us through in places where there's gaps, which is fine, but it's not doing anything for the pocketbook. And frankly, we're discussing topics that are prevalent to the news that should be arriving through those platforms anyway, just by the nature of us getting the information that we need, not just from the outlets that get approved, because it's not easy to get approved as an outlet, as we have found out.
No, many times.
So now there's more.
So
That's
those are
not
the
where it
two.
stops.
Yeah, those two are law already.
Yeah.
In my view, they should both be repealed, which would not be if any government wanted to repeal it. That would be not that hard to do. You use your majority in Parliament, repeal it. I think they should go further and abolish the CRTC. I don't know what purpose it serves in an internet age where you can get thousands, if not millions, of different podcasts and websites and why do we need some regulatory body that's going to
We're in an environment
mess with
where
us?
broadcasters are handing back licenses because they can't make work of them. So yeah, the CRTC, aside from dealing with, what cell phone monopolies can take our money, it's kind of tough to see what they actually do. At this moment,
it's a power trip for bureaucrats and politicians to, I guess, make themselves feel useful or important, or
I think it comes with decent paychecks, to be honest with you, John.
That too.
And so now we're headed down the tubes toward 2 or 3 other pieces of legislation that could even be a bit more damaging.
Well, the ones before Parliament currently. So you have C2, C8, C9. C2 is the Strong Borders Act, which in my opinion should be called the Strong Surveillance Act. This is what the government, they add in a whole bunch of stuff, right? So you have the Strong Borders Act, C2. Parts of it do pertain to the borders and immigration policy and refugee policy. But then you have other stuff like the creation of a new Authorized Access to Information Act, which will give new powers to federal government officials to conduct warrantless searches on computers and cell phones and to demand subscriber data from larger companies like Rogers or Bell or TELUS, whatever. So there's a whole bunch of, criminalizing cash in amounts over 10,000, authorizing Canada Post to open letter mail. So all this stuff has nothing to do with borders, but very violating of civil liberties. Now, fortunately, C2, the federal government seems to have put it on the back burner. Okay. But really bad.
What do you think the general purpose of that is? I mean, if it's not border security, why are we chasing laws like this?
I think it's a battle that's been raging on for hundreds of years and will continue to rage on. It's a battle between freedom and tyranny. And there are people and let's just assume they have good intentions, but there are people who, they don't like the free society. They don't like it when, you and I and everybody else, we lead our own lives, we make our own decisions. It's like, no, they've got a project that everybody has to get on board with. And so whether it's a theocracy, like in Iran and Saudi Arabia, you got to get on board with Islam. You can't publicly criticize Islam. You'll be in jail or worse. It could be a fascist thing like Mussolini's Italy. It could be National Socialist like in Germany.
Well, look at the comparisons that are being made.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you bring that up, John, and before the show, I was kind of looking at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. That's not for profit. You guys started around 2010.
Registered charity since 2010.
Yeah. So, the genesis of that, I thought to myself, that's terrific. And I lived in the States for 12 years. So, some of the things that you're talking about, taking a bill and adding pieces onto a bill and doing things, very American. Like these concepts are things that Americans do all the time. I think when I was there, quite frankly, you'd be reading an agricultural bill and all of a sudden you'd see a gaming section. And next thing you know, there were 10 casinos in the state, right? And you'd be like, how did the agricultural bill get tied to the gaming bill? but it was just things that they were moving, and they were cutting deals with each other to pass things, and they were being added to bills to pass them through. What was the genesis? So take me back for a minute. So, when the group started, and I assume you all had the same kind of feelings, as you just said, about tyranny and the way this was going. What in 2010 kind of was the turning point where you guys got together and said, we're going to put this together. We got to stop this, and we got to challenge this, because, that's a tough thing to do. And I really commend you guys, because in Canada, you don't see as much of that. I think we have a group in Ontario that does a similar thing, Constitutional Freedom Group. It's a different group. But how did it start?
Well, in the early days of the Justice Center, most of our work was defending campus free speech.
Oh.
And at that time, so around 2010, the only group that was kind of a target of censorship was the campus pro-life groups. And they were coming out with a message that a lot of people find offensive and don't want to hear it, don't want to see it, whatever. And so we sued the University of Calgary. They threatened to expel these pro-life students simply for peacefully. There's no violence, and they didn't set up an overnight tent city, and there wasn't physical obstruction, and but peaceful expression on campus. They were threatened with expulsion. They were found guilty of non-academic misconduct. They were not expelled, but they were still found guilty. So we sued the University of Calgary, and ultimately we got a court ruling against them. And the court said that's not reasonable to have these disciplinary proceedings against these students for peacefully expressing their opinion on campus. We had another court case against the University of Alberta, which got really clever by saying, we allow all speech on campus except the pro-life group. If you want to put up a display, you have to pay $17,500 for a security fee, which of course means it's effectively censorship, because how could a student group come up with $17,500? And the threat to safety and security was coming from people with the opposing viewpoint that were going to be disruptive and obstruction and, get within 6 inches of your face. And so it's like, well, so they're actually punishing the pro-life group with a security fee when the wrongdoing or potential wrongdoing is coming from people that don't want to debate, and they don't want to set up their own display, but they want to physically obstruct, blockade, shut down, the types of people that would pull a fire alarm, shout down a speaker. And the university panders to those people, and they get what they want because they threaten to create a fuss, and then the university gets scared, and they punish, rather than upholding free speech, they punish the people that want to express their views by saying, well, there's a threat to safety and security, so you have to come up with $17,500 if you want to peacefully express your views on campus.
So it sounds like different iterations of this are the same methodology you're going to fight at every level, municipally, at the university level, or even at the federal level. It sounds like the same process you would have to go through by saying, look, it's just frankly unfair.
Well, the cancel culture has grown. Things have gotten worse. It's just so commonplace now where a venue, the moment that there's somebody that's upset or offended, it's, a lot of venues will back down, some won't. Mm-hmm. So it's a deterioration, and it is analogous, unfortunately, to what we saw 90 years ago. In Germany, we had the gradual decline and breakdown of democracy in the free society, and that was preceded by thugs disrupting other people's meetings. So the communists had their red shirts. They would go and bust up, bang up. Other political parties would just show up there, and they wouldn't show up with guns and kill people, but they kind of disrupt, rough people up, throw a few punches, toss a few chairs around, and disrupt the meetings of other parties. And then the National Socialists, they said, well, we got to protect ourselves against these terrible communists, so we're going to create our brown shirts. And they were doing the same thing then, and going around disrupting, shutting down other people's meetings. So you had this cancel culture. Ours in Canada 90 years later is a little bit less thuggish, but it's the same idea.
Same idea, same method.
Same method. I'm going to prevent you from having your event because I'm going to show up scream, shout, yell, make noise, pull a fire alarm.
Well, it's interesting. And you talk, constitutional freedoms, it's in your name. And, again, I mentioned to you, I lived in the U.S. for 12 years. So it's very interesting to watch some differences. And born here, came back. And it's interesting. Canadians don't really even think of their constitutional freedoms and what they are. Can we talk a little bit about that and kind of the differences you see around the world? Because it's interesting. I'm watching what's happening right now in the UK and then the US. And I'm thinking, okay, why Canadians are having the same challenges, but we don't focus on it for some reason. And is that just because we're too busy, too small?
I think it's a gradual transformation of the country in the past 50, 60 years, starting with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I'm told by people like Ted Byfield, who's passed away a few years ago, but older Canadians said that throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, right into the end of the 60s, we were very proudly British North America, and we were very British, and we had the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau disliked that and got us off on the well, we're not British, but we're not American, and we're kind of anti-American, and yeah. It's here we are 50 years later, and there is still some Canadian identity, but it's not. I think you put 10 Canadians in a room and ask them what Canadian identity was all about, you'd probably get 10 different answers.
Oh yeah, and what's their constitutional freedoms? Would they even know?
Well, it used to be 50 or 60 years ago, people just kind of understood as part of our British heritage that we had freedom of speech, religion, association, freedom of conscience. Before Pierre Trudeau added the charter to our constitution, everybody understood that a man is innocent until proven guilty. You have a right to a fair trial. You have a right to remain silent so that we don't have a situation where police are torturing or extracting a confession out of you through torture. So you have a legal right to not speak when you're criminally charged, and the not speaking will not be used against you. And this was all part of the fabric of our culture. And I think,
but hey, John, can I ask you something? Was that, and it's interesting because you're a historian, obviously, you understand the background to it. Was that let's call it, was that because it's part of UK parliamentary legal process, so that's why, and we followed from that? Or was it specifically written?
It was just part of our culture.
Just part of our, that's what I thought, right? It was kind
like
of
this whole idea that like before right now, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or the Charter for short, sets out in writing that an accused person has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Right. You have the right to counsel. You have the right to a fair trial before an independent and impartial tribunal. Blah, blah, blah. These are spelled out. Before 1982, they were not spelled out, and yet they were honored. The police understood, the Crown prosecutors understood, the lawyers understood, the judges understood that you've got a right to a fair trial and you have a right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, et cetera. So it's just part of the culture. So what's changed is the culture that people today in 2026, there are many, many Canadians, I would say, especially the younger ones, but Canadians of all ages, they don't understand that freedom of expression is vital to democracy. Yeah. You would find people who will tell you, "Oh, I'm in favor of free speech as long as it's not offensive." It's just like,
all right,
that's crazy, right? Like, freedom of speech is worthless and it means nothing if I can't go stand on a sidewalk and say something that you don't want to hear. You don't have to stand there and listen. You can ignore me and walk past me. But if I can't go onto a street corner and say something that 99% of the people disagree with, then there's no free speech. Free speech, it's about that. It's about an unpopular viewpoint that people consider to be wrong and false, that you can go and peacefully say what other people think is wrong or false.
Right. Thank goodness for podcasting. I think we're getting more of that done. Having said that, your organization will actually get out there and represent these events, these moments where freedoms are being, I guess, impeded, if not stomped on. How do you guys go about that? Like, who does it? Is it a group of experts, lawyers? Tell me about the group.
So we've got 10 lawyers. We have court cases from BC to Newfoundland. We've got a lawyer in Quebec. We've got several in Ontario, lawyers in Alberta. And then for provinces where we don't have a full-time staff lawyer, we still run the cases there, right? Like currently we don't have staff lawyers in British Columbia or Saskatchewan, but we take on cases in BC and Saskatchewan that are done by the Alberta or Ontario lawyers, whatever, somebody. Yeah. So for example, we're representing a lady in BC who was told by her school board or by her school that she was not allowed to host an international student in a student exchange program, which she had done previously and everything had been fine, because she had publicly criticized the SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity curriculum, and it said that she disagreed with the curriculum. It just stated her opinions. Yeah. And the school said, oh, well, you're not eligible to host an international student.
What was their justification of that?
Well, she's a bad person because she's publicly. They didn't say that I'm paraphrasing, okay?
But
it's like if you criticize SOGI, the sexual orientation, gender identity, which is in all the BC schools, yeah, and there's variations of it probably all across Canada. If you criticize SOGI, you're a bad person, because a good person will support SOGI, and if you disagree with SOGI, you're a bad person. You're not worthy of hosting an international student. I was like the Supreme Court of Canada said Trinity Western University is not worthy of being allowed to have a law school because they have an evangelical Christian community covenant that says no sex outside of marriage. And this is the woke tyranny that is growing still. I mean, I see growing pushback as well.
It's wild.
Well, in the States, we did a show, remember, at the beginning when we started the podcasting network, basically about what the U.S. is doing right now on this front. And it has to do with a lot about, wokeness is going away. But, again, having spent time living in the U.S. and spent time in growing up in Canada, Americans really, that debate around freedom of speech and their rights and, their charter per se, they spend a lot of time on it and they protect it. We don't talk about it a lot, which is a shame. And I think it's coming to the forefront now, which, what you guys are doing is amazing, because that debate has to happen. And I think I was just saying, I'm glad we met, because I don't think that debate happens enough. I think we're all kind of saying, oh, well, it'll work itself out.
Yeah, nobody's ever going to really let that happen.
Yeah.
It's a perverse, it's a twisting of a good thing. So we have politeness, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I try to, we all of us strive to not offend people unnecessarily, right? I'm not going to say something bad about your wife or your mother or your kids or whatever, right? Because and it's good. It's good to be polite.
To be part of society, we have to have interdiplomacy.
Yeah. So this niceness and diplomacy, and our mothers said, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, which is a good maxim to live by, but like not in an absolute black and white every circumstance, but as a starting point, if you can't say something nice, don't say. So these are all good things, and it's good to be polite and it's good to be nice. However, if you take that to an extreme, then it gets into, well, you're not allowed to say something that I disagree with, because if I disagree with it, I'm offended and you're offending me. And when you say something that I disagree with, you're offensive, and you shouldn't be offensive. And then this is how it breaks down, which is unfortunate, but it's the twisting of a good thing, right? So politeness and respect, diplomacy are good things, but then they get twisted into, we can't have an honest debate anymore about, lockdowns or mandatory vaccination policies or abortion or euthanasia or, men getting transferred into women's prisons, which is one of our court cases, or on and on and on. There's
John,
this whole, we can't debate this anymore because somebody says that they feel offended.
But that politeness was what got us to solutions often. That regular politeness,
Early
that
days.
general politeness of, okay, I heard your side of it, John. Hear me out.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually listening.
Listened, yeah.
Okay, so that is genuine.
That's authentic politeness, where you listen to another viewpoint.
Yeah.
You don't just, you got to shut up right now because you're saying something I disagree with.
At that moment, you might even say to me, well, all right, I can see how you would see that perspective. That's when the solution begins between us, understanding the other person's perspective, even if it's wrong, even if you've hated it up to that point. Now, I say this as an obvious thing, but there you are across the country. These guys are fighting battles on this wokeness issue, which Paul points out this is real. The entertainment business has lost over $1 trillion in the U.S. market over wokeness, and audiences rejecting the content they're putting out there because it makes no sense to their humanity or to their sensibilities. But it was pushed down the throats of the system of broadcast and networks and the movie systems and even music. And now they find themselves in a lost position because they followed that route.
Well, if it's private companies, they will, the market will cause them to change their ways. Here in Canada, we're forced to spend, taxpayers pay $4 million every day, 365 days a year, to the CBC. So $1.55 billion. And I just had a column in the Western Standard earlier today about how the Federal Court of Appeal upheld a lower court ruling that Trudeau violated the conditions and terms of the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act required a serious threat to sovereignty, health and safety. Ordinary law enforcement can't work. The Justice Centre was involved in that case. We provided lawyers for Canadians at the trial level. And so we won at trial. We got that declaration that the Trudeau and federal cabinet acted illegally. And then 2 years later, we got this Federal Court of Appeal ruling. So the CBC comes out with a story and says, neo-Nazi group linked to Freedom Convoy. And I was like, what is this? And so it was a French language. And they said there was a trial of this guy in Ontario who was accused of being involved with a terrorist group, wasn't accused of terrorist acts that harm people, but it's a crime to be involved in a terrorist group. Okay. And then there's a witness who said that there was a camera that was used with this group in 2018 to film some of their crazy activities in the woods. And the same camera was in Ottawa in February 2022 taking shots of Freedom Convoy. So, okay, so there was a camera that was in two different locations at two different points in time. And yet they come out and say, this proves that the headline says Freedom Convoy linked to neo-Nazis. That's the headline, right? So they're smearing Freedom Convoy with our money, with our tax dollars.
And the inaccuracy of which they reported is not noted actually by anybody, because everybody's on that same, everybody in that world, in the CBC world, will just back that up.
We'll back that up.
Yeah.
And many people often read only the headlines. I know I do that, right? Like we're busy and there's a gazillion stories, right? So the headline says, neo-Nazi group, Atomwaffen Division, linked to Freedom Convoy. That's the headline, right? And most people will see the headline. They won't read the story. And this is the CBC smearing Freedom Convoy. And the CBC will also, they'll say,
I promise that we'll title this one, Freedom Fighting Lawyer Looks Out for Your Rights, okay? Does that sound fair?
Well, but it's interesting because, the Emergency Act, which that ruling to me was amazing. It could still, it's still going to go to the Prime Minister's desk to maybe go to the Supreme Court. I think that's where it sits now. Let's see where
he's not likely to
do that.
Persuade them to hear it. Supreme Court's got a two-step, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
They got a two-step process. First, you have to ask the court, would you please hear this appeal? And you have to persuade the Supreme Court that there is a very important legal doctrine that is in need of clarification because the waters are muddied and diluted and it's not clear. And, because let's say the BC and Saskatchewan courts of appeal ruled one way on an issue and the Alberta and Quebec courts ruled the opposite way. And then you go to the Supreme Court and say, look, we've got this really important legal doctrine. We need clarity.
Right.
That's how you get into the Supreme Court. So I think the federal government would have an uphill fight going to the Supreme Court and saying, oh, well, there's an important national doctrine that is lacking in clarity.
Right. It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then, and on top of just the Emergency Act part of it, there's a bunch of search and seizure issues that actually come into play with that also, right? The fact that they were freezing bank accounts, freezing funds, and
they were monitoring the crowd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a whole host of other issues that kind of it's multi-tiered, again. But these conversations, I find it interesting. Again, I'm drawing sort of from around the world. My experience, lived in a number of places. Again, in Canada, when I came back, we don't talk about them, we don't debate them, and we don't. You probably know them from a legal perspective, but because the media is not talking about it and putting them in, and both sides of the media aren't putting them in, we don't have fulsome debate, which is a shame, and we should be. And those are people who fight against it. Shame on them, because if a case, for example, the Emergency Act is one, we should look at it and we should say, how do we not do that again?
Yeah.
Therefore, we take that off the table. So your point about polite and being a polite society, it has to be based on a set of premise, legal background that we all follow, and then we can. Now, if that changes down the road, it should be put up for debate. There should be a legal challenge, and then it should be decided, and then we should move forward. I think that's probably what we're missing right now. So again, when it was funny because we were having this debate on the Constitution and freedoms for a while. And we said, we'd like to find someone. And it's interesting. We found each other through this trip, but it was amazing. We were having a hard time finding someone who was really open to talk about it. And
that's the truth. We tried to find a class action specialist, people that would actually understand that, and to be connected actually is very fortuitous, because a lot of the things that we're talking about on a daily basis when it comes to politics, freedom falls into it in a big way.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of, expression.
This is what our soldiers fought to defend, particularly in World War II, when we were fighting the National Socialist Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. These were dictatorial regimes that were oppressive and tyrannical and expansionist. And so we were fighting to defend ourselves, as a country, but it was also the ideals of parliamentary democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from tyranny and oppression, that we have a free society. That was what united Britain, Canada, the United States, and other countries to fight and thankfully win against the National Socialists and the fascists that were in charge in Germany and Italy. So the freedom is really important. But what's happened more recently is that it's not really threatened by an external enemy. I mean, you got communist China is a pretty bad regime, but I don't think people are scared that they're going to send in the army and attack us militarily, right? So now, maybe it's easier to fight for freedom when the people against it are so obviously the enemies, like Adolf Hitler and Mussolini are the enemies of freedom, right? It kind of crystallizes it for the mind. Like now, we don't really have an external enemy that's threatening our freedom. It's just from within, like this woke ideology that you're not allowed to say, you can't speak honestly about the whole transgender stuff, because now in Ontario and Manitoba, you could actually get in trouble for misgendering is a violation of the Human Rights Code, which applies to speech. You could even in Alberta, you could get a complaint filed against you. I'm not aware of that having happened, but if you misgender somebody, right?
Right.
That you could have a human rights complaint filed against you.
Yeah, I think that's okay. So I'll get to the obvious question in a minute. We left one of the impending laws off the discussion, I think. What's the last one that's before our government right now?
I think there's two.
Is there two more?
I think there's two more. Yeah.
So yeah, so for
I
recap,
lost
so
count. Can you imagine?
well, there's 6 bills. So the C-11 Online Streaming Act gave the CRTC legal authority over the internet and Canadian podcasts and websites. The C-18 Online News Act has taken away from us the ability to use Facebook to forward news to each other. C2 is the Strong Borders Act, which has a bunch of bad provisions, but the government's put it on the back burner. C8 is the Cybersecurity Act, which would give federal cabinet ministers the power to kick individual Canadians off the internet if the cabinet minister decided that somebody was a threat to the national cyber infrastructure. It's just very broadly worded. They need to amend it to clarify that it can't be used in respect of content.
Boy, I hope that one gets thrown out for obvious reasons. Okay.
And then we got C9, which is the Combating Hate Act, which would remove a current requirement for a hate speech prosecution to move ahead. It needs the permission of the Attorney General or the Justice Minister. It would get rid of that. So it would take us towards becoming more like the United Kingdom, where you got 30 people charged with, over social media commentary. They say we got too much immigration or the wrong kind of immigration, and you get a knock on your door and the police officer's there. So C9 is called the Combating Hate Act. Very clever.
That's the one where you can't be a comedian. Forget about it. There can't be any comedians in the UK anymore.
No, I spent some time in the UK this summer, and it's palpable, the fear among the comedy community to really say anything of any magnitude is, to be sardonic or sarcastic or to hold a mirror up to ourselves. You have to say some things. And there's
a guy got in trouble for saying, I was assigned mammal at birth, but now I identify as fish. Got in trouble for that.
Am I allowed to laugh? That's okay to laugh
I identify.
at, right?
I identify as fish. I was assigned mammal at birth. Assigned. But now I really identify as fish.
No, you can't make a joke. I mean, there is very serious. And even online. I mean, that's the other thing is that now we're being threatened with our history over time. So if I said something to you 8 months ago and my opinion has changed and you and I have made up, and we've even shared dialogue that's more positive, they can still charge me based on the comments that were made previously.
Yeah. So that's C9. I've heard some rumblings that the government's backing down on that. Now, the last one, the 6th one, is I think the scariest of all, and that's the Online Harms Act. It was brought in 2 years ago as Bill C-63. It was brought in early 2024. It died, thankfully, with the April 2025 election.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The federal government keeps saying they're going to bring it back. So C-63, huge, long bill, but a few items I'll try to summarize. Federal cabinet gets powers to pass internet censorship regulations. Digital Safety Commission created to enforce regulations. Massive multi-million-dollar fines for companies that violate these regulations. These regulations are not subject to parliamentary scrutiny. The federal cabinet makes them, right? So that if the Online Harms Act passes into law, that law says that the cabinet, without further scrutiny or input from cabinet, can pass censorship regulations to censor the internet. Then another provision, a judge can place you under house arrest, order you to obey a curfew, put you into an ankle bracelet, based on a fear of your neighbor that you might commit a speech crime in future. So we're talking about Minority Report, the movie. We're talking about Canadians who have not been charged with any criminal offense. They have not been found guilty of any offense, and yet the judge would have the power to place them under house arrest and order them to refrain from communicating and so on, based on somebody fearing that they might commit speech crime in future.
And then
Really
to be able,
scary.
and then to be able to represent themselves from their home in an ankle bracelet with no ability to reach the world, they're basically imprisoned.
You know, yeah. This is, it's shocking. Like it sounds too evil to be true, but it's actually in. So this is what they want to bring back, right? So the federal cabinet can regulate the internet. Digital Safety Commission, with hundreds of new bureaucrats hired, can enforce it. Judges can impose conditions on Canadians' freedom who have not been charged with or convicted of any criminal code offense. Canadian Human Rights Commission gets new powers to prosecute Canadians over non-criminal discriminatory speech, with fines up to $50,000 payable to government, $20,000 payable to complainants who could be anonymous. I don't know what they do with.
So if I complain on you, I get $20K.
Potentially, that's the upper limit.
Have a nice drive home. Thinking about that.
Yeah.
Right,
Well,
like-
you know, maybe I'll only be ordered to pay you, you know, $1,000 because my you know, speech was a little bit discriminatory and not overly discriminatory.
Well, I'm going to get what I can.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the problem in the end, is it turns everybody into these weird kind of speech snitches. Minority Report is a really good example of this. So, okay, now.
So that's the sixth and final bill. That's the Online Harms Act, has not been reintroduced. The federal government keeps on saying that they're going to reintroduce the same legislation. So the Justice Center on our website, we've got a letter writing campaign where people can click, 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 and send a letter to their own MP to say, don't bring back the Online Harms Act.
Okay, we're going to make sure that that link is available in the description. And that was really, that was my final question, really, Paul, was, okay, here we are. There has to be a route to get us out of this. There has to be a roadmap that gets us out. What is that? And it sounds to me like it's taking action, letting the government know, and actually putting your name on something that says, I, as a Canadian, don't want this. I don't want these restrictions. I don't understand this law. I refuse to just let it happen.
Absolutely. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And so when citizens are engaged in the democratic process, and we've seen this with Bill C-2, the Strong Borders Act, there are so many things in there: violations of privacy, the surveillance state, you know, civil liberties groups were against it. There was a massive outcry, and the government said, you know, okay, that hasn't been withdrawn, but it's been put on the back burner. In fact, what the federal government did was they took out the parts of the Strong Borders Act that were actually about immigration and refugees, created a new bill, and got that bill passed. I don't know if it's passed yet or not, but you know, and all this other stuff about criminalizing the use of cash, and the surveillance state, and the Authorized Access to Information Act, and Canada Post can open your letter mail. All that stuff has been put on the back burner. Why? Right. Because Canadians contacted their MPs
and said, I don't want this anymore.
Yeah,
so there's your inspiration right there. John, I'm blown away. First of all, I'm glad that we met you. Second of all, thank you. You seem to be the check that in the balance needs to be there. That, you know, sadly that it has to be, but that you're doing this for Canadians and that your organization is so widespread. Blows my mind, actually.
Yeah, no, it does. And I really appreciate all the work you do. And, you know, the more we talk about it, I feel the more people can get educated and have the debate. And that's what's missing unfortunately, in Canada right now.
Well, credit goes to the generous donors, right? Next month in February, we are going to mail out about 9,500 official tax receipts to the 9,500 Canadians who donated to us in 2025, right? So we issue the tax receipts.
Yeah.
And then all those donations from those 9,500 people, they pay for the staff lawyers, the paralegals, the communication staff, the researchers, and we're going to be working hard in 2026 as well.
Wow. Fantastic. I mean, we definitely are blown away. If people wanted to reach out to you, where's the best way for them to do that?
So website is www.jccf.ca. So JCCF is Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, jccf.ca. and you can sign up for newsletter that we send out only once or twice a month, not daily or weekly. But if you sign up for a newsletter, you'll hear from us once or twice a month, updating on our cases and papers and projects and whatnot. And yeah, all of our court cases and everything's on the website.
You know what I would love to do, Paul, is one of these cases comes up in the future, and we just follow it from the beginning through the process and watch it unfold in the hands of John and his group. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on your show. It's an honor.
Let's get you back. What do you say?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget, subscribe, tell a friend, and for goodness sake, visit tpl.ca. And don't forget, you are the gas in the tank that keeps us moving. Thanks so much.